a culture that hid a lot of puzzling mysteries for scholars. An unusual method of countering tomb raiders. A major discovery that challenged highly experienced scholars. The Mykolayiv Regional Museum of Local Lore. It took 100 years between its establishment and opening it as a museum. The first findings included in the exhibits were made by sailors back in 1792. The first and genuine Mykolayiv Museum of Local Lore was opened by a lawyer and amateur archaeologist in 1913. It changed its addresses several times, and today it is one of the first museums of ancient history in Ukraine. Its objects are the result of exhausting and tremendous archaeological work and a true stroke of luck and success. Yet sometimes the smile of Lady Luck is more reminiscent of a grin. It is a case of a discovery in the village Kuriachi Lozy in the Mykolayiv oblast. At the moment, the museum exhibits 23 objects, 5 bronze bars, a celt, a battle axe, 2 sickles, and highly renowned types of socketed axes. Back in the day, research associate of the museum Vasil Nikitin and the famous archaeologist Ivan Chernyakov made their discoveries public. The scientific researchers dated their origin back to the 12th century BC. In particular, this was the late Bronze Era, and the time when the territories on which they made these discoveries were occupied by tribes of the Sabatynivka and Belozersk archaeological cultures. Ironically, the discoveries as well as the culture are veiled in mysteries. They encapsulate lucky fortune and unlucky fate. The tomb raiding on the cusp of the 19th and 20th centuries in the Kherson province reached its peak. Therefore, the founder of the Kherson Museum of Ancient History, Viktor Hoshkevich, wrote a book which was titled Treasures and Antiquities of the Kherson Province. He tried to convince the local population that they should not dig burial mounds and endanger their lives, since treasures and high-priced objects are found by chance, for instance, during construction works. He gave an example of real cases when treasures were found. The work of a Ukrainian historian and regional expert illustrates many unsuccessful attempts of amateur treasure hunters. Their interference inflicted more damage to science and archaeology than benefits. The exhibit of the Mykolayiv Regional Museum of Local Lore is yet another confirmation of the words of Viktor Hoshkevich. The treasure was found during construction works by villagers in Kuriachi Lozy. The local area expert contacted the museum about the findings, since he was concerned that the objects could remain in possession of those who found them. While these objects had no monetary value, they were absolutely invaluable from a historical vantage point. As a matter of fact, the treasure was not initially brought to the museum, but only after several years. Moreover, it was presented incomplete, just as the culture that was previously discarded by scholars. First and foremost, the Sabatynivka archaeological culture was considered to be a branch of another Bronze Age culture. It became separated a bit later, since scholars discovered that there are no Sabatynivka counterparts in Ukraine. The Sabatynivka culture occupied southern Ukraine, which included the Mykolayiv and Kherson oblasts and Crimea. The major settlements and landmarks of this culture were situated exactly in these places. The Sabatynivka culture obtained its name from a village in the Kirovohrad Oblast, where the first archaeological discoveries were made during the years of the pre-war period, but it was only extensively examined in the 1960s. It can be said that this was truly a blessing in disguise. Scholars gave a lot of attention to this culture due to the start of construction of the South Ukrainian nuclear power plant in the town Sabatynivka. Today the town bears the name Yuzhno-Ukrainsk. Oleg Zhuravlov joined the Yuzhno-Ukrainsk expedition in September of 1979. The archaeologist was digging one of the Sabatynivka culture settlements known as Tashlik. I went there from the ancient city Olvia. When I arrived there, I thought that I had never left Olvia. It had straight streets with remnants of houses along the roadside. On the other hand, it was something we had never seen before, as the remnants of houses and their foundations were made from rock. Olvia is a historically important Greek colony located in the region of the Lower Bug that was founded by natives of the ancient Greek state Miletus. This happy colony, as Miletus translates into English, had a very high level of development and was prosperous. Settlers built dugouts and half-dugouts during the first stage of the city's establishment. It was in the 6th century BC, and since the 5th century BC settlers started urban planning and building of the city with rocks. It is worth mentioning that Olvia was built on the same principle as any other Greek city was built. In other words, Greeks utilized the same method of urban planning in all colonies. The city had a center with a central inner sanctuary, temples, squares, trade facilities, and commercial buildings, as well as craft shops and other edifices which were situated all around this center.
Будинки господарського призначення, а також ремісничі майстерні і все інше.
Just imagine that the Sabatynivka culture existed 1,000 years before Olvia, in the 15th to 13th centuries BC. Yet they had distinctive planning of settlements and used the same building materials. Sabatynivka residents knew how to work not only with ragstone, but also with metal. The artifacts stored in the Mykolayiv museum are proof of this fact. People who understand history and archaeology would not be surprised by such a fact. After all, this was called the Bronze Age. However, what might one think if we tell that the people of Sabatynivka already knew how to work with iron in those ancient years? The fragment of iron piercer was found at Tashlik village. It is the earliest discovery of iron at Ukrainian territory. Unfortunately, it didn't save well for exhibition, but the fact remains, Sabatynivka folks knew how to work with iron. The civilization which existed in the 2nd millennium BC rose to a level that was no less developed than the civilization that existed 1,000 years later. Moreover, it fostered the progress of many contemporary cultures. The Sabatynivka culture was quite a precursor. It was the last extremely large culture of the late Bronze Age. We know about many settlements of this culture. These people were farmers. They had a massive and well-developed house construction system, a highly developed economy, including bronze casting, bone carving, and ceramic production. Every settlement of this culture that was discovered during our Yuzhno-Ukrainsk expedition had its unique specialization that no other settlement had. For instance, Tashlik had a bone carving manufactory. It means that different objects were made from the bones of animals. The Bug settlement was a center of bronze casting production, seeing as we found there a lot of bronze slugs and molds during our expedition. The specialization of the Sabatynivka settlement is a phenomenon not known by contemporaries and even some descendants. However, this is not its only surprising feature. It seemed as if the sites were competing with one another to show which one could produce a more surprising piece of work than the other. Oleg Zhuravlov was shocked by one of these findings, the mystery he cannot solve or unveil to this very day. Once I arrived to the Bugh settlement, and I was of course met warmly by the local residents. The head of the expedition gave me a dinner and then invited me to his room, which he occupied in one of the village houses. I entered and he closed the door, covered the window with a sheet and switched off the lights. Then he said to me, "Pull the large blanket off the bed." So I pulled it off and saw a huge barbell 1.5 meters in length. I asked, "Have you accommodated some kind of cyclops that trained with these heavy barbells?" The response of the head of the expedition, Vladimir Klushintsev, astonished Zhuravlov. It turns out that the object that he called a barbell was actually an anchor of a sea ship. "Do you see this notch groove for a rope in the center?" I indeed saw a notch groove. I said, "Once I saw something similar in the Dnipro. The expedition team found an anchor of the Bronze Age, but could not identify to which culture it belonged. It is today exhibited in the Zaporizhia Museum of Local Lore. It is a plate 1.5 meters in diameter, with a notch groove for a rope on the other side." I said, "They're not the same," he replied, "and the anchors were different." The discovery enabled scholars to declare that the Sabatynivka culture had its own maritime fleet during that period. It could be compared to a fleet of the Mediterranean Sea. At the same time, Mediterranean ceramics were found in Sabatynivka settlements. It occurred to me that not just some people arrived here, but people of the Sabatynivka settlements traveled on their ships to the Mediterranean and traded goods there. The treasure from Kuriachi Lozy proves the theory that the settlers of Sabatynivka developed relationships with other cultures. They were probably not located that far away. However, the treasure includes objects that are typologically distinctive for metal-cutting manufactories in the Transylvanian center of bronze casting production. These territories are today part of Romania. Notably, a significant part of the objects found there did not make it to a museum collection. Many items remained in the possession of those people who discovered them, and no one knows exactly where they are preserved today. Other Sabatynivka artifacts had the same destiny. The head of the expedition, Klushintsev, died, and we were unable to find that huge barbell after his death. We don't know where and how it had disappeared, along with other artifacts of the Bugh settlement. Alas, our research efforts gave us no results. It is noteworthy that both the working materials of Vladimir Klushintsev and the Sabatynivka culture vanished from the face of the earth. For instance, people of the Trypillian culture burned their houses to the ground with everything they had, while the people of the Sabatynivka culture did exactly the opposite. There was no devastating invasion, and why they left these territories, we don't know. We didn't find any ruins. The local inhabitants simply took what they could and deserted their settlement. There is a theory that some archaeologists support that Troy was established by people of the Sabatynivka culture. Despite this, there is no strong evidence to support such a theory. Although site proof exists, it is still not enough to substantiate the scientific theory proposed by Ukrainian archaeologists. It may be a beautiful legend, or perhaps it is a true historic fact. Maybe one day another discovery that at first glance may be accidental or intentional and insignificant will prove the theories of the scholars mentioned above.